The billionaire who missed his flight and found his purpose. CEO Marcus Thorne was boarding his private jet, a man who valued time above all else, when he saw a little girl crying alone on the polished marble floor of the airport lounge. He stopped. Minutes later, he lost his flight, and nothing in his meticulously controlled Manhattan life would ever be the same. This is the unbelievable true story of the moment a billionaire's life was rerouted by a child who shared his eyes and the secret she carried. Subscribe right now. Hit the like button and leave a comment. Do you believe some connections are so strong they're destined to find a way back, even after years of separation? Chapter 1. The Disruption in Manhattan. JFK Private Terminal. Marcus Thorne sat in the exclusive JFK Private Terminal lounge, legs crossed, a noise-canceling earbud tucked into his left ear. His charcoal suit was flawless, his sandy blonde hair neatly swept back, and his piercing gray-blue eyes were entirely focused on the stock figures flickering on his custom laptop. He was a man who didn't waste time, not on small talk, not on delays, and certainly not on strangers. His life operated on a clockwork of efficiency: transatlantic flights, market mergers, strategy, and silence. The outside world, with all its mess and emotion, was kept at a controlled distance. But today, something shattered that distance in the most unexpected way. As his boarding group was called over the intercom, Marcus reached for his briefcase and stood up. Just as he turned towards the private jet gate, a sound stopped him. It wasn't loud, just soft, broken sobs. But in the sterile quiet of the lounge, it was unmistakable. He looked toward the source. Near the edge of the seating area, a small girl was sitting on the polished floor, curled up beside a tiny white satchel and a well-loved stuffed rabbit. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her light floral dress looked slightly crumpled, and her curly blonde hair framed her face in soft, tangled wisps. Small white clips barely held the hair away from her pale forehead. Her shoulders shook as she wept, trying to muffle the sound against the rabbit's worn fabric. People were looking. Some glanced away. Others frowned. But no one moved. No one asked. No one. Marcus hesitated. This was not his problem. His plane was boarding. His schedule was rigid. He had already lost 3 minutes, but his feet didn't move toward the door. Instead, they moved toward her. He knelt slowly, loosening his tie slightly. Unsure why he felt nervous. "Are you lost?" he asked, keeping his voice quiet and low. The little girl looked up with wide, tear-filled blue eyes that reflected his own more than he realized. She sniffed, clutched the rabbit tighter, and shook her head. "Mommy went to the restroom and didn't come back," she said. "She told me to stay here. I did, but she didn't come back." Marcus glanced around. No nearby adult seemed remotely connected to the girl. There was a small pink jacket folded on the seat behind her and a woman's handbag sitting next to her. But otherwise, nothing. He frowned, reaching for his phone. "What's your name?" he asked, already dialing airport security services. The girl replied softly, "Chloe." The name hit him like a slow, silent punch. Chloe. It wasn't unfamiliar. It was familiar in a way that twisted his gut. As he spoke to airport staff, and they began checking security footage, Marcus stayed near her. He offered water, which she refused. He asked if she wanted to sit in a chair. She said no. Her mother told her not to move. She was perfectly obedient. An hour passed before security returned with the footage. A woman, slender and dark-haired, holding Chloe's hand, was seen entering the restroom area. No footage showed her exiting. Finally, after a search, she was found unconscious in a service hallway behind the restrooms. Overdose. Emergency services arrived. Marcus overheard the paramedic mention the name on her ID and stopped breathing for a second. Maya Sterling. He hadn't heard that name in almost 6 years, but it wasn't a name one forgot. Not when it belonged to the only woman who ever got under his skin. Then she vanished, without a trace. Maya, and now this small child, Chloe, sitting on the floor in front of him. She was her daughter. He watched her as she picked at the fur on her rabbit's ear. The tears had dried, but she still looked terrified, hollowed out by confusion, and something older than any child should feel. Marcus couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when a long-buried man had just taken a face. He sat down next to Chloe and said softly, "You don't have to wait alone anymore." He missed his flight, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. Chapter 2. The Proof and the Quiet Promise. Marcus didn't take Chloe home immediately. Instead, he arranged a private hotel suite near the hospital where Maya had been admitted. Staff had tried to offer alternatives, a social worker, a temporary shelter. But Marcus dismissed them all. There was no hesitation in his voice when he said he would take responsibility for the child. The moment he heard Maya's name, a part of him that had been buried deep beneath years of control and emotional detachment woke up. And he knew, without evidence or explanation, that Chloe was his daughter. He couldn't prove it yet, but his instincts had never spoken so loudly. Chloe clutched her stuffed rabbit as they rode silently in the back of his black town car. She didn't talk, didn't cry. She just stared out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. Occasionally she would look at Marcus, but she didn't ask questions. She had the look of someone who had learned to be quiet and invisible. Marcus, watching her in the mirror, felt something constrict in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. When they arrived at the hotel, he gently guided her inside. The staff recognized him immediately. Mr. Thorne was a known figure in the financial world, and they offered their best suite. He requested a quiet floor, room service on call, and absolute privacy. Once inside the suite, he showed Chloe the bedroom, the television, the balcony. She wasn't allowed to go on without him. She nodded to everything, not really reacting, as if her body was present, but her mind was floating elsewhere. He ordered her a hot dinner, something simple, grilled cheese and soup. She sat on the edge of the sofa and ate with tiny, careful bites, still holding the rabbit with one arm. Marcus sat opposite her with an untouched plate of food. He watched her more than he spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you remember your mom talking about someone named Marcus?" he asked. Chloe looked up, a piece of bread halted in her hand. She thought for a second. Then she nodded slowly. She said he was someone from before, someone she missed, even when she didn't say it. Marcus felt the air go still. Maya hadn't just disappeared. She had carried a piece of him with her. And now that piece was sitting in front of him, quiet and unsure, needing someone who wouldn't vanish. He tucked her into bed that night, awkwardly at first. He wasn't used to brushing small teeth or finding the right voice for a bedtime story. She chose a picture book from the hotel's children's selection, and he read it stiffly. Until she interrupted him midway and whispered, "You don't have to be good at it. Just don't stop reading." He didn't. After she fell asleep, clinging to her rabbit and breathing in soft patterns, Marcus went into the other room and made the call. A private medical lab he had used before, discreet and fast. He requested a DNA test. He submitted his own sample immediately and arranged for Chloe's to be collected in the morning, gently, without frightening her. He knew he could wait for the answers, but in his gut, he already had them. He stood by the suite window for a long time, watching the dark city move beyond the glass. His phone vibrated with messages from his assistant, his board, his lawyers. He ignored them all. Nothing in his perfectly structured empire felt as important as the tiny child asleep behind the door. The pieces didn't fit yet, but the weight of it had already settled in his bones. Whether the test confirmed it or not, Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't leaving her. Not now. Not ever. Audience interaction. Chloe's quiet obedience suggests a history of fear. How should Marcus approach building trust with a child who has learned to be invisible? Leave your advice in the comments. Share this video if you believe in the power of second chances. Chapter 3. The Truth and the New Center. The DNA results arrived in less than 48 hours. Marcus hadn't told Chloe about the test, not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he knew that labeling what they already felt wouldn't change the way he was treating her. Still, when the envelope arrived via private courier, his heart beat faster than he expected. He opened it alone, standing at the desk in the hotel suite study area, while Chloe quietly watched a cartoon in the next room, her rabbit still never far from her grasp. The result was printed in clear, clinical language. 99% probability of paternity. Marcus sat down slowly, the page trembling slightly in his hands. He was her biological father. It was now fact, not just a feeling. The weight of that knowledge brought not relief so much as it brought clarity. He hadn't just stumbled into someone else's crisis. He had found his daughter, and she had been alone in the world for too long. He thought of all the years he had spent chasing perfection, his reputation, his empire, his image, while his daughter had been growing up without him, having no idea who he was or why he had never come. The guilt didn't hit him suddenly. It seeped into every thought, quiet and constant, remodeling everything. That afternoon, he picked her up from where she was drawing on hotel stationery and asked if she wanted to go for a walk. She nodded. They walked through a nearby park in silence for a while, Chloe holding his hand, but still keeping her gaze low, as children do when they don't yet trust the world to stay kind. Eventually, she stopped and pointed to a small bench by a fountain. They sat down together, and after a long pause, she asked, "Is Mommy going to die?" Her voice wasn't dramatic or scared. It was quiet, resigned. Too heavy for someone her age. Marcus didn't lie. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but the doctors are doing everything they can to help her." She nodded. "She told me once that if anything ever happened to her, I should look for someone named Marcus, but I didn't know how. I just waited." She looked up at him for the first time with something akin to hope, not yet trust, but the beginning of it. "Are you him?" "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. "I am." She leaned against him without another word, her small shoulder resting against his chest, as if testing if he was real. He didn't move. He didn't talk. He just stayed there, letting her decide how much closeness she could handle. It wasn't the affection that hit him then. It was the awe. Somehow, she had found her way to him, without even knowing it. Later that night, back at the hotel, he contacted his legal team. He needed to begin the process for formal guardianship immediately. With Maya unconscious and unable to consent, it would require paperwork, hearings, background checks, and judicial approval. He didn't care how long it took. He would do it right. He also reached out to a child psychologist, arranging for an evaluation and emotional support for Chloe in the coming days. He wanted her to feel safe, not just fed and housed. He wanted her to know she mattered. She had survived for too long. Now she deserved to start healing. That night, when he tucked her into bed, she turned to him and asked, "Will you still be here tomorrow?" The question came out softly, almost a whisper she was afraid to believe. "I'll be here every day," he said, "as long as you want me to be." She didn't answer immediately, but then she nodded once, closed her eyes, and reached out a hand to clutch his sleeve as she drifted off to sleep. Marcus didn't move. He sat there beside her, still in his suit jacket, his fingers curled into the fabric, and understood something he never had before. He wasn't rescuing her. She was saving him, too. Chapter 4. The New Rhythm and the Small Grins. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Quiet, yet momentous. Marcus extended their stay in the hotel suite, while renovations discreetly began on his penthouse to prepare a permanent home for Chloe. One with a bedroom designed just for her, soft lighting, safety latches, and space for toys and books he hadn't chosen yet. But until that space was ready, he did his best to make the hotel feel like more than just a temporary refuge. Chloe quickly adapted to the quiet luxury of their surroundings, not in the way of a child dazzled by wealth, but with the quiet gratitude of someone who had been cold before and was now warm. She asked few questions, never demanded anything, and often looked at Marcus for silent permission before doing even the simplest things, like reaching for a juice box or turning on the TV. Something broke in him every time she hesitated like that, as if kindness was still something she hadn't learned to trust. He made it his mission to not only see to her needs, but to offer a presence, the kind that expected nothing in return. He read to her every night, even when he had meetings that ran late or calls that waited unanswered. He started getting up early, not to check financial reports, but to learn how to braid hair, watching online tutorials so that when she asked him, he could do it almost right. The first time she smiled wide enough to show her missing front tooth, he realized it was the first full smile he had seen from her. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. She told him about her rabbit, which she had named Sky, because it was the same color as the sky she used to watch out her bedroom window when she was scared at night. She shared that her favorite food was pancakes, but only if they were soft inside, and that she was afraid of hospitals. Not because of needles, but because she had once waited in one for hours, not knowing if her mother would ever come back. Marcus listened to all of it. He didn't always know what to say, but he never dismissed a single word. The more she opened up, the more fiercely protective he became. Not just because she was his daughter, but because she was finally learning what it felt like to be heard. Meanwhile, Maya remained unconscious in the hospital. Marcus visited her daily, even if only for a few minutes. He would sit by her bedside, tell her about Chloe's day, and update her on the legal progress. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he spoke anyway. Not out of obligation, but because part of him needed her to know that he was finally doing what he should have done long ago. He no longer felt bitterness toward her, only sadness, for the years they had lost, for the weight she must have carried alone, for the fear that had made her disappear. One afternoon, after a hospital visit, Marcus took Chloe to a small bookstore. It was raining lightly outside, and she held his hand tighter as they crossed the wet pavement. Inside, the air smelled of paper and warmth. Chloe wandered carefully through the children's section, her fingers tracing the covers as if they were made of something fragile. She finally chose a book about a fox who found its way home after getting lost in the woods. That night, she asked Marcus to read it twice. When he finished the second time, she whispered, "Do you think the fox knew where it was going?" He paused. Then he replied, "I think the fox didn't know, but it followed something inside it, and it guided it exactly where it was meant to be." She felt like that made perfect sense. Then she snuggled under her blanket and fell asleep. The next morning, Marcus received confirmation from his legal team. The emergency guardianship petition had been approved. It was temporary, but it was official. He was now, the eyes of the law, Chloe's legal guardian. He folded the document slowly, not because he doubted the outcome, but because holding it felt like holding a second chance in his own hands. When he told Chloe the news, she didn't cheer or jump. She simply smiled softly and said, "So, I get to stay now." Marcus knelt in front of her, and looked her in the eyes. "You never have to leave again," he said, and for the first time. She reached out without hesitation and hugged him, arms tight around his neck, as if she had been waiting her whole life for someone to say those words and truly mean them. Chapter 5. Building a home in the sky. The penthouse was ready in 2 weeks, transformed from a sterile, minimalist bachelor pad into a place that could now be called home. Gone were the chrome edges, the cold lighting, and the cutting silence. In their place were warm rugs, softer furniture, a kitchen that smelled like real meals, and a bedroom down the hall that Chloe chose every detail of, from the wall color to the shape of the nightlight. Marcus had never cared about interior design beyond aesthetics, but now he found himself researching secure drawer latches, non-toxic paints, and the best bedtime storybooks for 5-year-olds. His calendar, once packed with investment reports and mergers, now included field trip dates, parent forms, and a daily reminder labeled "Pick up Chloe." Their first day in the new home was quiet, but full of meaning. Chloe explored slowly, taking her time to look at everything. Her favorite thing turned out to be a small window seat in the corner of her room, where she could curl up with her rabbit and watch the city lights turn on at night. Marcus watched her without interrupting, standing in the doorway as she touched the edge of a shelf and tested the softness of her blanket. It was the first time he had seen her act like a child who was simply experiencing comfort, not survival. In the days that followed, they built new routines. Pancake Sundays became sacred, even when the pancakes came out lopsided or burnt. Marcus learned to laugh when Chloe smeared whipped cream on his nose. On weekday mornings, she insisted on brushing her hair herself, then asked him to fix it afterward, which usually meant starting over, but pretending she had done most of the work. Evenings were spent with coloring books, simple puzzles, or reading together. Chloe had a quiet sense of humor and began to let it show more often. Little sarcastic smirks, witty observations, too advanced for her age, and the occasional fit of giggles that ended in hiccups. Marcus had never known how much joy could come from a child's laughter, until he heard hers resonating through his silent apartment. But not all moments were joyful. One evening, as Marcus was finishing the dishes, he found Chloe huddled behind the sofa, shaking. When he reached for her, she didn't want to talk, just held her rabbit tight against her chest. Finally, through choked whispers, she said she had spilled juice on his rug and thought she was going to be punished. Marcus sat on the floor beside her, not touching her yet, and asked gently who had punished her for accidents before. She didn't answer, but the way she flinched told him everything he needed to know. He told her firmly, but gently, that mistakes were allowed in this home, and no one would ever be hurt for being human. She looked at him as if trying to gauge if she could believe him. He didn't ask her to. He simply cleaned the rug, handed her a fresh cup of juice, and kept the evening quiet. At bedtime, she moved closer to him and asked if he would sit beside her until she fell asleep. As the weeks passed, Marcus continued to visit Maya at the hospital, though she remained unconscious. He brought her updates, drawings Chloe had made, stories of their daily life, even silly anecdotes about burnt breakfasts. He spoke to her as if she could hear, as if she might open her eyes at any moment and see what had grown in her absence. He didn't know what would happen when she woke, or how she would feel about the new family forming in her shadow. But he knew one thing clearly. He wanted to be there when she did, and he wanted to be the man who could look her in the eye and say, "I stayed." One night, Marcus received a call from his attorney, confirming the court had scheduled a formal custody review. Though the temporary guardianship had gone well, the presence of a living, though incapacitated mother meant the court would need to evaluate everything before finalizing full custody. Marcus wasn't surprised. but the weight of the process pressed down on him. It meant background investigations, psychological evaluations, more interviews with Chloe, and, most likely, a social worker's observation of their life together. It meant proving he was good enough, not as a CTO, but as a father. That evening, when he sat beside Chloe in her room as she drifted off, he didn't read a book. Instead, he told her a story of a fox that got lost in the woods and kept walking because it believed someone was waiting for it at the end. Chloe, sleepy but listening, asked, "Did someone wait?" Marcus paused. Then he replied, "Yes. Someone had been waiting all along." She didn't ask who. She just smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I think I'm the fox." He reached out and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead and said, "Then I suppose I was the one waiting." And in that small, quiet room, filled with soft light and the hum of the city below, it became more than just a temporary arrangement. It became something sacred, something worth protecting, no matter what came next. Chapter 6. The Unconditional Love and the Awakening. The morning of the court's family evaluation started like any other. Chloe woke up early, sitting at the breakfast bar in her pajamas, swinging her feet and quietly coloring while Marcus made pancakes. She asked if she could help stir the batter, and he let her, even though she spilled flour across the counter. There was laughter, light conversation, and a rhythm between them that had taken weeks to build. But beneath the easy routine, Marcus felt the pressure pushing behind his eyes. That afternoon, a court-appointed social worker would visit their home to assess the environment, observe their dynamic, and determine if Marcus's guardianship was healthy and in Chloe's best interest. This wasn't about money or status. It was about trust, security, and the invisible things that filled the space between a child and an adult who claimed to care. He had prepared meticulously. The apartment was immaculate, but still looked lived in, with drawings taped to the refrigerator, a small pair of shoes near the door, and Chloe's favorite book gently strewn across her bedroom rug. He didn't want perfection to scare the evaluator. He wanted authenticity. He dressed casually but neatly, and told Chloe that someone was coming to visit them to see how they lived. She asked if she had to wear a dress, and he told her only if she wanted to. She chose a soft blue one and asked him to fix her hair. He braided it carefully, the way she liked, and tied the ribbon just right. When the social worker arrived, she was warm and professional, her eyes kind but observing. She greeted Chloe first, kneeling to her level and introducing herself by her first name. Chloe, shy but polite, invited her in and offered to show her her rabbit's favorite hiding spot. Marcus stood back, letting her lead. The woman took her time, asking questions gently. What did Chloe like to do after school? What made her feel safe? What was bedtime like? Chloe answered with quiet confidence. She talked about pancakes and picture books, about their talks in the window seat, and how Marcus made her laugh when he tried to sing off-key lullabies. Later, while Chloe quietly drew at the table, the social worker asked Marcus to step into the kitchen for a private talk. She reviewed the preliminary file, noting that Chloe had shown signs of both resilience and past trauma, but had improved in sleep patterns, emotional regulation, and school performance since she was under Marcus's care. She asked him about his history with Maya, why he hadn't known about the child before, and his motivations for seeking full custody. Marcus answered honestly, without rehearsed lines. He told her about Maya's reappearance, or lack thereof, about how her sudden absence had left an unresolved wound in his life, and how finding Chloe had changed everything. He didn't pretend to be perfect, but he made it clear he was committed for life. The visit ended on a soft note. The social worker knelt one last time beside Chloe, who handed her a folded drawing. On it was a stick-figure family of 2 people, and a rabbit holding hands beneath a giant heart. The caption read, in misspelled lettering, "My home is here." The woman smiled and thanked her. Then she looked at Marcus with an expression that said more than words. She would file her report that evening, but Marcus already knew she had seen what mattered. The next morning, the court issued its preliminary review. The guardianship would be maintained, and the process toward full custody could proceed without objection. Marcus sat in silence when he received the email, the relief so overwhelming he felt almost hollow at first. He had been holding his breath for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to let it out. Chloe was sitting nearby, playing with paper dolls. He walked over, sat on the floor beside her, and simply said, "They said yes." She looked up, confused. "Yes to what?" "Yes to you staying with me. Forever, if you want to." She didn't answer with words. She crawled into his lap, rested her head against his chest, and whispered, "I already decided that a long time ago." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching the city glitter with distant lights, and thought of everything that had shifted. He still visited Maya daily. He still talked to her, even as the machines hummed and the monitors constantly blinked. He didn't know when or if she would wake. But if she did, he wanted her to know that Chloe hadn't just been found. She had been loved. Fiercely. Completely. Unconditionally. He turned to look down the hall, where Chloe's nightlight glowed softly under the door. A life that once existed only in theory. A concept he hadn't dared to dream of. Now it was alive, breathing, and soundly sleeping, in the room next to his own. And he knew, without a doubt, that the court had only confirmed what his heart already understood. They were no longer waiting for permission to be a family. They already were. Chapter 7. The unflinching choice. The adoption. Marcus had just returned from Chloe's school when he received the call from the hospital. It was brief and cautious. Maya had woken up. The doctor on the line warned him that she was weak, disoriented, and not yet fully coherent, but conscious. Marcus stood in the middle of his kitchen, phone in hand, frozen. For a moment, the world around him blurred into silence. He looked over at Chloe, who was sitting at the table, building a tower out of cereal boxes and carefully balancing her rabbit on top. He didn't tell her immediately. He didn't know how. But he packed a small bag, called a trusted assistant to stay with her for a few hours, and headed to the hospital, without hesitation. When he walked into Maya's room, she looked smaller than he remembered, her skin pale against the sterile white sheets, her eyes fluttering slowly toward the window. The moment she turned her head and saw him, there was a flicker of recognition. Not fear, not surprise. Something quieter. Maybe guilt. Maybe resignation. He walked closer, careful not to overwhelm her. She watched him. Then she whispered, "You came." Marcus pulled up a chair and sat by her side. "I never stopped," he said. "You disappeared. I didn't know where. And now you're here. And she is too." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, as if the mention of Chloe was too much to bear. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said. Her voice was husky, barely a breath. "I was scared. I thought I would ruin you if you knew. I didn't want to be another person who took something away from you." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You didn't ruin me, but you did leave me out of the most important part of my life. And now, she's everything." They sat in silence. The machines beeped quietly beside them. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she tried to reach for a glass of water. Marcus helped her. She took a sip. Then she said, "Is she okay? Is she happy?" "Yes," he said. "She's thriving. She's smart and strong and cautious. But she smiles more now. She laughs. She asks about you every night. Maya brought a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. I wanted to be better before I told you, but I never got better, and I didn't want her to grow up watching me fall apart. You did what you thought you had to do, Marcus said, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Later that night, he returned home to Chloe, who ran into his arms the moment he crossed the door. She asked if he went to a meeting, and he hesitated before saying, I saw someone very important. Your mommy. Her eyes widened, unsure whether to feel joy or fear. She woke up, she whispered. He nodded. She asked about you. She misses you. Chloe clutched his hand tightly. Can I see her? Marcus nodded again. Soon, when she's a little stronger. In the days that followed, they talked more often. Maya's strength slowly returned. Marcus visited her daily, updating her on Chloe's routines, her favorite books, the way she hated broccoli and loved staying up late. He brought her drawings, voice messages, even photos. Maya cried the first time she heard Chloe's voice say, Hi, Mommy. I hope you're okay. I'm good. Daddy is taking care of me. It was the first time either of them had heard her call Marcus that out loud. Daddy. Eventually, Marcus asked Maya what she wanted for Chloe's future. Her answer came without hesitation. I want her to have peace, and I think you give her that. I will never ask you to give her back. I only want to be the part of her life that she allows me to be. Marcus felt something shift in that moment. It wasn't closure or forgiveness, but a kind of understanding. They had both been through pain, shame, and uncertainty, and now they were here. Different, changed, but still willing to do the thing that mattered most. To love the same child in the best way possible. That weekend, Marcus and Chloe sat in their apartment and put together a scrapbook. She carefully pasted in photos of them baking cookies, her first day of school, her stuffed rabbit by the window seat. Then, she took a blank page and said, This one is for Mommy. And Marcus smiled, knowing they were making space, not just for the life they had built, but for the lives they were still finding room to embrace. A warm Saturday afternoon, almost 6 months after that day at the airport, Marcus stood in the living room, sleeves rolled up, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath his usually calm surface. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the wood floors and casting soft shadows over Chloe's colorful artwork, hung in uneven frames. Everything about the space was different now. It was no longer the home of a man who lived alone, but the home of a family. The scent of fresh lilies and something sweet baking in the oven drifted through the air. In the other room, Chloe was carefully arranging her stuffed animals in a line on the sofa, all facing the hallway, as if preparing for a ceremony. She was wearing a soft white dress with tiny blue flowers, and she had insisted on tying her shoes herself, clumsily, but proudly. Today was the day the adoption would be finalized. Papers had been signed, the court had approved everything, and all that remained was a simple in-person visit from a court officer to verify Marcus still intended to carry through with the formal process. It was mostly symbolic, a final check before the document was sealed and official. But to Marcus, it felt like so much more. It felt like the final brick in a foundation he had spent months, years really, unknowingly building. When the doorbell rang, Chloe rushed to open it, her rabbit tucked under one arm. The officer smiled warmly, greeted them both, and stepped inside with a clipboard and a light tone. The visit was short and pleasant, filled with kind questions, and even kinder comments about how comfortable Chloe seemed in the home. After she left, Marcus and Chloe stood in silence in the center of the room. It was done. She was his, not temporarily, not conditionally, officially, legally, forever. Chloe looked up at him with her wide, thoughtful eyes. So now I'm yours, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus crouched down and placed both hands on her small shoulders. "You've always been mine," he said. "Now it's just on paper, too." She hugged him tightly, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like a space that had finally been filled with something real. That evening, they invited Maya over for dinner for the first time since she had regained her strength. She had moved into a new apartment nearby and was in outpatient treatment, overcoming years of pain with steady progress. She arrived with a small bouquet of sunflowers and a cautious smile, unsure how the evening would go, but hopeful. Chloe greeted her with a drawing, herself in the middle, holding both Maya and Marcus's hands, and led her to the table with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that love didn't have to be divided. It could be shared. Dinner was simple. Pasta, salad, and cupcakes. Chloe had decorated with too much frosting. They laughed, told stories, and looked at old photos Maya had brought of herself and Chloe from earlier years. At one point, Maya leaned across the table and said, "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. For her, for not leaving." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for bringing her into this world. I'm just lucky I found her in it." Later, after Maya left, and Chloe had fallen asleep snuggled beside her rabbit and a new bedtime storybook, Marcus stood in the doorway of her room, his arms crossed, his eyes wet. The soft glow of the nightlight shone on her face, peaceful in a way that made everything else fade away. The court documents lay on the desk behind him, neatly stacked and notarized, but he no longer needed them to feel what was true. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights below flickered like distant stars, busy and cold. But here in this space, this warm, lived-in home, he had found something far more enduring than success. He had found a purpose that didn't require recognition, a kind of wealth that didn't appear on spreadsheets. And as he switched off the last light and whispered, "Good night," to the quiet apartment, he understood fully what he had once been too afraid to admit. He wasn't just a man who had stepped into a child's life. He was a father, not just by blood, but by every choice, every quiet promise, every moment of staying when it would have been easier to walk away. And that made him richer than he had ever dreamed possible.